old and irrelevant. Those were the words that echoed in the jasmine-scented air of the exclusive Italian lakeside resort, a verbal dagger aimed at one of the world's most powerful women. She was a titan of industry, a ghost in the machine of global finance. But at that moment, she was just a wife watching her husband of 25 years fawn over his young, ambitious mistress. The girl Katerina thought she was delivering a killing blow, a final shove to push the old guard aside. What she didn't know, what her lover had foolishly forgotten, was that Genevieve Beaumont wasn't just the old guard. She was the game, and she was about to change the rules by buying the very ground they were standing on. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story of what happens when a quiet queen is mistaken for a forgotten pawn. The Grand Elysian Hotel on Lake Como was not merely a place to stay. It was a statement. Perched on the verdant hills overlooking the shimmering water, its centuries-old marble facade was a testament to enduring wealth and discreet power. Suites started at €20,000 a night. The guest list was a secret, but whispers of tech moguls, reclusive royalty, and shadowy financiers were as common as the scent of blooming wisteria that clung to the terraces. For Robert and Genevieve Beaumont, it was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place to commemorate 25 years of a marriage that the world viewed as a fortress. From the outside, they were the perfect power couple. Robert Beaumont, with his silvering hair, tailored Brioni suits, and a smile that could disarm senators, was the face of Beaumont Global. He was the one on the magazine covers, the one giving keynote speeches on corporate synergy and market disruption. He was charming, charismatic, and everyone believed he was the architect of their billion-dollar empire. Genevieve Beaumont, his wife, was the empire's ghost. She preferred the shadows, the silent hum of the data centers. She'd designed the complex algorithms of the proprietary trading software she had coded herself in the early days. While Robert charmed investors over brandy and cigars, Genevieve was the one who saw the subtle market shifts 3 steps ahead of everyone else. She didn't attend galas. She analyzed geopolitical risk factors. She didn't cultivate socialites. She cultivated assets. Her name was on the marriage certificate and the company's founding documents. But to the wider world, she was a quiet, elegant accessory to her husband's brilliance. A relic from a time before he became a titan. Old, perhaps. Irrelevant. A word no one who truly knew her would ever dare to think, let alone speak. Their anniversary dinner was set on a private terrace overlooking the lake as the sun bled orange and purple across the sky. Robert was late. He was often late. Genevieve sat nursing a glass of water, her gaze distant. She wasn't looking at the breathtaking view. She was replaying the morning's encrypted video conference with her team in Tokyo. A hostile takeover bid for a smaller tech firm was in its final delicate stages. She had orchestrated it with the precision of a master chess player, all from a tablet discreetly placed in her carry-on. "My love, I am so sorry." Robert's voice boomed as he finally arrived, kissing the air near her cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne and something else, a faint, cloyingly sweet perfume that wasn't hers. An urgent call with the board. You know how it is. Genevieve knew exactly how it was. The board hadn't met today. She had a controlling interest. She would have known. But she simply nodded, her expression unreadable. For months there had been signs. The late nights he claimed were meetings, the second phone that was always silenced, the detached way he looked at her, as if she were a familiar piece of furniture he no longer truly saw. She had built an empire on recognizing patterns, and the pattern here was painfully, insultingly clear. "You look beautiful tonight, Jen," he said, settling into his chair. It was a line he'd used 1,000 times, delivered with the same practiced ease as his quarterly earnings reports. He didn't notice that the diamond necklace he'd given her for their 20th anniversary was absent from her neck. He didn't notice the subtle tension in her jaw. He saw what he expected to see his quiet, reliable wife. "Did you handle the acquisition of Farsight Analytics?" she asked, her voice calm and level. Robert blinked, momentarily thrown. "Ah, yes. Of course. My team is all over it. We're forecasting a 20% Q4 uplift from their IP alone." His team. Genevieve had personally headhunted the lead negotiator and drafted the core terms of the deal. She let it slide. It was part of their unspoken arrangement. He took the credit. She took the profit. It had worked for decades, but something had shifted. The arrangement felt less like a partnership and more like a theft. As the waiter brought their appetizers, a delicate arrangement of scallops and truffle foam, Genevieve saw it. Across the main terrace, partially obscured by a potted olive tree, was a woman. She was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with impossibly long blonde hair and a tight, garish red dress that seemed designed to command attention. She was laughing a loud theatrical sound that grated on the serene atmosphere, and she was staring directly at Robert. A small, triumphant smirk played on her lips. Robert, catching the glance, gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a flicker of a smile, before turning his attention back to his wife. The pattern was no longer a theory. It was a vibrant, crimson-clad reality sipping a Bellini less than 100 feet away. And Genevieve Beaumont, the woman who could predict the collapse of a foreign market from a single data point, finally allowed herself to feel the full, cold weight of the betrayal. The dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a charade. Genevieve excused herself from the table under the pretense of needing a wrap from their suite. The lie was flimsy, but Robert accepted it with a relieved smile, immediately pulling out his second phone as she walked away. She didn't go to the suite. Instead, she took a winding path through the hotel's immaculate gardens, her heels clicking softly on the flagstone. The air was cool, but a cold fire was burning in her chest. She found a secluded alcove, a stone bench hidden behind a cascade of bougainvillea, which offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the main terrace bar, where the woman in red was now holding court. Robert, believing Genevieve was gone for a while, had made his way over to her. Genevieve watched a silent observer in the shadows as he leaned in his hand possessively on the small of the woman's back. The gesture was so casually intimate, it was like a physical blow. The woman was Katerina Petrova, a name Genevieve already knew. Her private security chief, a thorough man named Mason, had flagged her 3 weeks ago. Kat was an influencer and an aspiring actress whose main talent seemed to be latching on to wealthy married men. Mason's report had been concise: high-risk social climber, aggressive, lacks discretion. Looking at her now draped over Robert like a cheap scarf, Genevieve could see Mason's assessment was, if anything, an understatement. She watched as Kat laughed, tossing her hair back, her eyes scanning the crowd, ensuring everyone saw her with the great Robert Beaumont. This wasn't just an affair, it was a public performance. A hostile takeover of a different kind. Genevieve's phone buzzed in her clutch. It was a text from Robert. "Just networking with a potential investor, darling. Be back soon." The sheer audacity of it was almost breathtaking. He was lying to her while she was watching him. She stayed put, a statue, carved from ice and fury. She needed to see this through, to understand the full scope of the battlefield, before she planned her counterattack. After about 20 minutes, Robert kissed Kat on the cheek and headed back towards their private terrace, presumably expecting to find Genevieve waiting patiently. Now was the moment. Genevieve stepped out from the alcove and began walking not towards her own table, but directly towards Kat. As she approached the bar, a hush fell over the immediate area. The other patrons, a mix of old money and new tech, recognized her. Genevieve Beaumont rarely made public appearances, but when she did, she commanded a silent, formidable respect. She moved with an unnerving stillness, her simple, impeccably tailored navy blue dress a stark contrast to Kat's desperate red. Kat watched her approach, a flicker of panic in her eyes, before it was replaced by a defiant sneer. She thought this was the moment she'd been waiting for, the hysterical wife, the public scene, the final proof that she had won. "Can I help you?" Kat asked, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. Genevieve stopped directly in front of her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The ambient noise of the terrace seemed to shrink away, creating a pocket of intense silence around them. "I believe you are acquainted with my husband," Genevieve said. It wasn't a question. Kat let out a short, sharp laugh. "Robbie, of course, he's a wonderful man, so full of life, of vision. It's a shame he's been held back for so long." The insult was clear, a direct shot across the bow. Genevieve's expression remained unchanged, held back. "Oh, come on," Kat said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "Don't play the clueless old wife. It's pathetic. You've had your time. You built the company with him, fine. We all know the story. But that was decades ago. The world moves on. He needs someone vibrant, someone relevant, someone who understands the now." She gestured vaguely at Genevieve's classic dress, the understated elegance of her pearl earrings. "Look at you. You're a relic, a black and white photo in a digital world. He's tired of being shackled to a museum piece." Genevieve stood utterly still, absorbing the words. Each one was designed to wound, to diminish, to erase her. And behind the cheap insults, she could hear Robert's voice, his complaints, his justifications twisted and amplified by this vapid, cruel young woman. "You're his past," Kat continued, emboldened by Genevieve's silence. She stood up, trying to use her height to intimidate, to physically loom over her. "I am his future. The sooner you accept that you are old and irrelevant, the easier it will be for everyone." Old and irrelevant. The words hung in the air. This was the core of it. The narrative Robert had likely spun for himself and for his mistress. The Genevieve was a fading power, a figurehead from a bygone era whom he no longer needed. They had made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. They had mistaken her silence for weakness. They mistook her preference for the shadows as a sign she was afraid of the light. Genevieve didn't flinch. She didn't cry. A strange, chilling calm settled over her. The hurt was there, a deep, icy shard in her heart, but it was being rapidly encased by something else. Something cold, hard, and calculating. It was the same feeling she got right before, a hostile takeover, the adrenaline surge of a predator that has just spotted a fatal weakness in its prey. She held Kat's gaze for a long moment. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if accepting a piece of data. She turned without another word and walked away, leaving Kat smirking in her wake, convinced she had won the confrontation, the man and the future. Kat had no idea that she had just signed not only her own social and financial death warrant, but also that of the man she thought was her ticket to the top. Genevieve Beaumont was many things, but she was not irrelevant, and she was about to provide a masterclass in the true meaning of power. Genevieve walked back to the private terrace, her steps measured and deliberate. The fury was a white-hot coal inside her, but her exterior was a mask of placid control. Robert was there sipping his wine, a look of mild annoyance on his face that quickly shifted to feigned concern as she approached. "There you are," he said, standing up. "I was getting worried. Everything all right?" Perfectly, Genevieve replied, her voice smooth as polished marble. She sat down, picked up her napkin, and placed it in her lap. The air was just a little stuffy inside. Robert relaxed, satisfied with her non-answer. He launched into a story about a deal he was supposedly brokering, the words flowing effortlessly. He was a good performer. Genevieve listened, nodding at the appropriate times, her mind 1,000 miles away. She was no longer his wife in that moment. She was his opponent. She was dissecting his weaknesses, his assets, his dependencies, and she knew them all because she had created them. She knew his personal accounts were surprisingly light for a man of his supposed stature. He was a spender, not a saver. She knew his directorships on various boards were all granted on the strength of his position at Beaumont Global, a position she could revoke. She knew his entire identity. His social standing, his very sense of self was inextricably linked to the empire she had built. He had forgotten that he was living in her house, playing with her toys. To 25 years, Robert said, raising his glass, his eyes glinting with a sincerity she now knew was utterly false. And to the next 25. Genevieve raised her glass of water. To the future, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. She met his gaze across the rim of her glass, and for the first time that night, he seemed to notice something was wrong. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He saw not his wife, but a stranger. It was a fleeting moment, gone as quickly as it came, and he dismissed it. His arrogance was his shield. They finished the meal in near silence, the stilted conversation a poor substitute for the chasm that had opened between them. When they returned to their palatial suite, the imperial suite, the hotel's finest, Robert immediately went to the bathroom to make a call, shutting the door firmly behind him. Genevieve heard the muffled tones of his voice, no doubt reassuring his mistress that the old wife suspected nothing. Genevieve walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering lights dotting the shore of Lake Como. The Grand Elysian stood as a beacon of luxury, a playground for the rich and powerful, and tonight it had been the stage for her humiliation. A deep, primal anger surged through her. It was one thing to be betrayed. It was another to be dismissed, old and irrelevant. The words were an insult not just to her as a woman, but to her as the architect of everything he was. Kat was a symptom. Robert was the disease. His casual disrespect, his belief that he could so easily replace the foundation of his own life, was the ultimate sin. She would not have a screaming match. She would not cry and plead. She would not engage in the messy, emotional war they expected. Her battlefield was the balance sheet. Her weapons were contracts and clauses. She would respond not as a scorned wife, but as a CIO. She would respond with overwhelming, incalculable force. She took out her own phone, a sleek encrypted device that held the keys to her kingdom. She scrolled through her contacts to a single entry, David Chen. David was her chief counsel and most trusted operational officer. A quiet, ruthlessly efficient man who had been with her for 15 years, he understood her mind better than anyone. He knew she never acted on impulse, that every command, no matter how audacious, was the result of cold, hard calculation. He answered on the first ring, despite it being the middle of the night in New York. Genevieve. No pleasantries. He knew she wouldn't be calling at this hour for a chat. David, she said, her voice low and steady. I have a new acquisition target. The Grand Elysian Hotel, Lake Como. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. David was used to her bold moves, buying out tech rivals, acquiring mineral rights in unstable countries, but this was different. This was personal. The hotel, he finally asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. Is this a corporate retreat matter? No. Genevieve said, her eyes fixed on the hotel's main building, a glittering jewel across the manicured lawns. I want to buy the entire property, the building, the land, the brand, everything. I want it by morning. Another pause, longer this time. David was processing the sheer scale and strangeness of the request. A landmark property like the Elysian wasn't something you bought overnight. It was owned by a reclusive old-money European family, the Montgomerys, who were notoriously resistant to selling. Genevieve, that's practically impossible, David said, his professional caution kicking in. The ownership is a labyrinth of trusts and offshore entities. The Montgomery family would never. Silas Montgomery. Genevieve cut in, lost over $200 million in a bad crypto speculation 6 months ago. He leveraged a significant portion of his hotel shares to cover the loss with a consortium of very unforgiving private lenders. The final payment is due in 72 hours. He is desperate. He just doesn't want anyone to know. The silence on the other end was now one of pure astonishment. David should have known. She always had the intelligence. She was always 5 steps ahead. "Find Silas. Wake him up if you have to," Genevieve commanded, her voice turning to steel. "You are authorized to offer 30% above the highest recent valuation. No negotiations. It's a single take-it-or-leave-it offer, valid for 3 hours. Use the funds from the Polaris holding account. It's liquid and untraceable back to Beaumont Global. I want the deal signed, sealed, and delivered before the sun rises over this lake." "And if he refuses?" David asked, already knowing the answer. "Then you will buy his debt from the lending consortium," Genevieve said coldly. "And I will take the hotel from him for pennies on the dollar. Make sure he understands that. His choice is a fortune or a foreclosure. I want it, David." There was no questioning the resolve in her voice. This wasn't a business decision. It was a declaration of war. "Consider it done," David said, the sound of furious typing already beginning in the background. Genevieve ended the call. The bathroom door opened, and Robert emerged, a falsely cheerful smile plastered on his face. "All sorted," he said. "Just a little fire to put out with the Hong Kong office." "Good," Genevieve said, turning from the window to face him, a faint, chilling smile on her own lips. "You should get some rest. It's going to be a very big day tomorrow." He had no idea. While Robert Beaumont slept, the sound, untroubled sleep of the blissfully ignorant, a silent global financial blitzkrieg was underway. On the 80th floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan, David Chen's corner office, normally dark at 3 a.m., was a hive of frantic activity. He had assembled his core team, a forensic accountant, a specialist in European property law, and a mergers and acquisitions prodigy barely out of her 20s. The air crackled with the energy of an impossible deadline. Their first task was locating Silas Montgomery. He wasn't at his ancestral home in Geneva or his penthouse in Paris. Using a trace on his digital footprint, a last-minute booking on a private charter, they found him. He was holed up in a high-stakes poker game in a private suite at the Casino de Monte Carlo, trying to win back his fortune. It was a portrait of pure desperation. David didn't delegate the call. He made it himself. "Mr. Montgomery." David's voice was calm, cutting through the faint sounds of clinking chips and nervous laughter in the background. "My name is David Chen. I represent a client who wishes to make you an offer for the Grand Elysian." Silas, a man in his late 60s, with a voice raspy from cigars and stress, was dismissive. "The hotel is not for sale. It has been in my family for 5 generations. Now, if you'll excuse me. My client is aware of your outstanding obligations to the Caspian Group," David said, dropping the name of the notoriously ruthless lenders. "And we are aware that your final payment is due by close of business Friday. My client is offering you a way out, a very generous one." The line went silent. The bravado in Silas's voice evaporated. David had him. He laid out Genevieve's terms, a price that would not only clear his entire debt, but leave him with a fortune substantial enough to live out his days in luxury. The alternative was clear public ruin and the humiliation of seeing his family's legacy stripped away in a foreclosure. The offer was valid for 3 hours. While Silas sweat over his decision in Monaco, David's team worked in parallel. They used pre-established shell corporations in Liechtenstein and the Cayman Islands to create a purchasing entity with no discernible link to Genevieve Beaumont or her company. Funds were transferred through a series of complex wire transactions routed through banks in Zurich, Singapore, and finally Milan. It was a masterwork of financial obfuscation designed to be swift, silent, and absolute. Just before the 3-hour deadline expired, Silas Montgomery's call came through. His voice was heavy with the weight of defeat and relief. "I accept." The next 2 hours were a blur of digital signatures, encrypted file transfers, and emergency authorizations from sleepy European banking officials David's team had on retainer for just such occasions. By 5:45 a.m. Lake Como time. Just as the first hint of grey light appeared on the horizon, the transaction was complete. A digital confirmation, a simple string of code, confirmed the transfer of ownership. The Grand Elysian Hotel, a jewel of European hospitality for over a century, now belonged to Genevieve Beaumont. David sent a one-word text to his boss, "Done." In the imperial suite, Genevieve had not slept. She sat in an armchair by the window, watching the dawn break. Her phone vibrated once. She read David's message, and a feeling of profound, icy satisfaction washed over her. The stage was now hers. She stood up and walked to the closet. She bypassed the elegant evening gowns and conservative day dresses Robert was accustomed to seeing her in. Instead, she chose a striking crimson power suit. It was a color she rarely wore, a bold, unapologetic statement. She styled her hair, applied her makeup with a steady hand, and when she was finished, the woman looking back in the mirror was not the quiet background figure of Genevieve Beaumont. It was a queen ready for battle. Robert stirred as she was putting on her diamond earrings, not the small, tasteful studs she usually wore, but large, brilliant-cut solitaires that caught the morning light and threw fire. "Jen, you're up early," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "And you're wearing red." "I have an early meeting," she said, her voice bright and crisp. "A new acquisition. I thought I should dress for the occasion." "On our anniversary trip," he said, a note of irritation in his voice. "Can't it wait?" "No," she said, turning to face him, a brilliant, predatory smile on her face. "It absolutely cannot." She left the suite, leaving him confused and slightly unnerved. He had no idea the meeting was at his own hotel, and he had no idea he was the primary subject on the agenda. Downstairs, the Grand Elysian was waking up. The scent of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air. Genevieve bypassed the main dining room. Her first act as owner was a private meeting in the hotel manager's office. Mr. Dubois, a fastidious Frenchman who had managed the hotel for 20 years, was in a state of shock. He had been woken by a call at dawn from Silas Montgomery himself, informing him of the ownership change and instructing him to give the new owner his absolute and unconditional cooperation. He had been expecting a representative from some faceless corporation. When Genevieve Beaumont, one of his most distinguished current guests, walked into his office, he nearly fainted. "Mrs. Beaumont, I don't understand," he stammered. "It's quite simple, Jean-Pierre." Genevieve said, using his first name to establish an immediate new dynamic. She was no longer a guest. She was his employer. As of 6 a.m. this morning, I am the sole proprietor of this establishment. Your employment and that of your entire staff is secure, provided you follow my instructions to the letter. Is that clear? Yes. Of course, madame. He said, his mind reeling. She gave him a series of precise, non-negotiable orders. First, the Imperial Suite was to have its locks changed at precisely 11:00 a.m. The belongings of its current occupants were to be packed with care by his most discreet staff and held in storage. Second, a specific table on the main terrace, the best one with the most prominent view, was to be reserved for her for lunch at 1:00 p.m. Third, and most importantly, under no circumstances were Robert Beaumont or his guest to be informed of the change in ownership. They were to be treated as normal guests until she decided otherwise. Your loyalty was to Mr. Montgomery. Genevieve finished her voice, leaving no room for argument. It is now to me. Complete discretion is paramount. Meanwhile, Robert Beaumont was enjoying the morning. With Genevieve gone to her mysterious meeting, he felt a sense of freedom. He sent a quick text to Kat. She's gone for the morning. Poolside in an hour. The cabana by the fountain. Kat arrived, looking like a starlet from a 1950s film, all wide sunglasses and a flowing white caftan over a minuscule bikini. She draped herself onto the lounge chair, next to Robert, ordering a mimosa from a passing waiter. So how did the old bat take it last night? Kat asked, her voice laced with smug curiosity. Did she cry? She was quiet. Robert admitted a little disappointed himself. He had expected tears drama. It would have validated his decision, made him feel like the powerful man leaving his boring life behind. Very strange, dressed in a bright red suit this morning, and said she had a business meeting. Kat laughed, a shrill, dismissive sound. Oh, how cute, playing CEO on your anniversary trip. She's probably just buying another boring software company, trying to feel relevant. Relevant. There was that word again. It doesn't matter, Robert said, squeezing her hand. After this trip, I'm going to tell her. It's time. I'll be fair, of course. She'll be well taken care of. As she should be. Kat purred already, picturing her life as the new Mrs. Beaumont. The villas, the jets, the endless credit. You're the visionary, Robbie. You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who appreciates you. For the next few hours, they lived out their fantasy. They swam in the infinity pool, ordered champagne, and talked loudly about their future plans. A trip to St. Bart's, redecorating the Manhattan penthouse. They were careless and conspicuous, certain they were untouchable. Several hotel guests, recognizing Robert, looked on with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The staff, under strict orders from Mr. Dubois, treated them with impeccable, if slightly frosty, professionalism. At 11:05 a.m., while Robert was boasting to Kat about a fictional corporate raid, he was planning 2 discreet housekeepers and a security guard entered the Imperial Suite. They methodically and silently packed every bespoke suit, every designer dress, every personal item belonging to Robert and Genevieve into fine leather trunks, clearing the suite as if its occupants had simply vanished into thin air. At 12:45 p.m., Robert and Kat, flushed with sun and champagne, made their way to the terrace for lunch. They requested the best table, the one at the corner, with the panoramic view of the lake. The maître d', a man named Marco, who had been briefed personally by Mr. Dubois, gave them a polite but firm smile. I'm very sorry, sir, but that table is reserved. Robert frowned. Reserved, I'm Robert Beaumont. I'm staying in the Imperial Suite. Just give me the table." "My apologies, sir," Marco said, his face a mask of professional regret. "But it is reserved for the hotel's new owner." Robert and Kat exchanged a look of confusion. New owner? Since when Silas Montgomery has owned this place forever? "There was a change in ownership this morning, sir," Marco replied smoothly. "And she is very specific about her table." He gestured to a slightly less prominent table nearby. "Perhaps you would be comfortable here." Slightly annoyed but intrigued by the gossip, Robert and Kat took the offered table. "A new owner must be some Russian oligarch or a Saudi prince," Kat whispered conspiratorially. "I wonder if she's single." They ordered another bottle of champagne, their mood barely dampened. They watched the reserved table, waiting to catch a glimpse of this mysterious new power player. They were about to get the shock of their lives. At precisely 1:00 p.m., Genevieve Beaumont walked onto the terrace. She had changed out of the red suit and was now wearing a stunning custom-made white dress that was the epitome of sophisticated power. Her bearing was regal, her expression serene. She was flanked by Mr. Dubois, who looked pale and nervous, and two formidable-looking men in dark suits who were clearly her personal security. She didn't glance at Robert and Kat. She moved with purpose towards the reserved table, the one they had been denied. Marco the maitre d' pulled out her chair with a flourish. The entire terrace seemed to pause, the clinking of cutlery and the murmur of conversation dying down as all eyes turned to her. Robert stared, his mouth slightly agape. "What on earth is she doing?" he muttered to Kat. "And who are those goons?" Kat sneered. "Putting on a show. Look at her. She must have found out about us. This is her pathetic attempt at a power play, making us watch her eat alone. How sad." They watched as Genevieve settled at her table. She didn't order. She simply placed her clutch on the table and looked out at the lake, the picture of calm. A moment later, Mr. Dubois approached Robert and Kat's table. He cleared his throat, his hands clasped nervously behind his back. "Mr. Beaumont, Miss Petrova." He began, his voice formal and strained. "I am afraid I have some news." "What is it?" Robert asked, impatiently annoyed by the interruption. Mr. Dubois took a deep breath. "The new owner of the Grand Elysian would like a word with you." He gestured towards Genevieve's table. The blood drained from Robert's face. Kat just looked confused. "Don't be ridiculous. She's his wife." "Madame Beaumont is the new owner." Mr. Dubois stated flatly, the words dropping like stones into the sudden silence. "She completed the purchase of the hotel at dawn this morning." Kat let out a strangled laugh of disbelief. "You're joking. That's impossible." Robert was speechless. His mind was scrambling, trying to process the information. The meeting, the red suit, a new acquisition. It was all clicking into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a pathetic power play. This was a strategic decapitation. "She has requested that you join her," Mr. Dubois said, his expression grim. Walking across the terrace felt like walking the plank. Every eye was on them. The whispers started quiet and vicious. Robert felt sweat bead on his forehead. Kat, for the first time, looked uncertain, her bravado faltering. They stopped at her table. Genevieve didn't look up at them immediately. She took a slow sip of water, letting the silence stretch, letting them marinate in their humiliation. Finally, she raised her eyes, and the look in them was not one of a heartbroken wife. It was the cold, dispassionate gaze of a predator that has its prey cornered. "Robert, Miss Petrova," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a shard of ice. "Thank you for joining me. Please don't sit. This won't take long." She turned her gaze to Kat, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. Miss Petrova, you gave me some advice last night. You told me that I am old and irrelevant. You suggested I was a museum piece. It was an interesting assessment. It prompted me to do some redecorating. She gestured grandly to the hotel around them. I decided to start by acquiring this particular museum. I find I quite like it. Kat's face was a mask of horror and disbelief. You can't. Oh, I can, Genevieve said, her voice dangerously soft. And I have. And as the new owner, I have a certain standard to maintain, a brand to protect. And that brand doesn't include you. She shifted her gaze to Robert, who looked as if he was about to collapse. Robert, I trust you enjoyed your final morning at my hotel. Your belongings, along with Miss Petrova's, have been packed. You'll find them waiting for you with the concierge. You have 10 minutes to vacate the property. A taxi has been called to take you to the local train station. The finality in her voice was absolute. This was not a negotiation. Genevieve, listen. Robert began, his voice a desperate croak. We can talk about this. In private. This is a mistake. The mistake was yours, Robert. She interrupted, her voice like cracking ice. You mistook my patience for permission. You mistook my silence for weakness. And you brought this vulgar little opportunist into my life. She flicked her eyes dismissively towards Kat. Now I am removing you both. Security will escort you from the premises if you are not gone in 10 minutes. She picked up a menu, a clear sign of dismissal. The audience was over. The humiliation was total and absolute. In front of the very people they sought to impress, Robert and Katerina were being thrown out like common trespassers. Kat, her face contorted with rage and shame, turned and fled the terrace. Robert stood frozen for a moment, longer, staring at the woman he thought he knew, the woman he had so casually discarded. The woman who had just checkmated him in a game he didn't even know he was playing. He turned and stumbled after Kat, the sound of laughter and shocked whispers following him like a physical blow. Genevieve watched them go, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to the waiting maître d'. Marco, she said calmly, I believe I'm ready to order now. The eviction from the Grand Elysian was brutal and efficient. As Genevieve had promised, 2 security guards, polite but immovable, met Robert and Kat in the lobby. Their luggage, a mountain of expensive leather and designer logos, was piled unceremoniously by the door. The concierge, avoiding eye contact, pointed them towards a waiting taxi, a standard local sedan, a far cry from the chauffeured Maybach they had arrived in. The ride to the Como San Giovanni train station was a cacophony of venom and panic. How could you let this happen? Kat shrieked, her carefully constructed mask of glamour cracking to reveal the raw, desperate avarice beneath. You told me you were the power. You told me she was nothing I thought she was. Robert retorted, his mind still reeling. He felt a profound sense of vertigo, as if the world he had known for 25 years had suddenly tilted on its axis. She handles the quiet back-end stuff, the coding, the analytics. I handle the deals, the people. The company is me. Is it, Robbie? Is it really? Kat sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. The quiet back-end stuff just bought €100 million hotel, like it was a handbag, and threw us out on our arses. What have you bought lately? A new watch. The accusation hit its mark. Robert's public image was built on the perception of his power, a perception that had just been publicly and spectacularly shattered. As they were dumped on the curb at the bustling train station, surrounded by their luggage like refugees from a fallen kingdom, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Robert's phone started buzzing incessantly. News travelled fast in their rarefied world. A guest on the terrace had undoubtedly filmed the entire confrontation. He saw texts from board members, from business partners, from his so-called friends, all with variations of the same message. What the hell is going on? His first instinct was damage control. He needed to get to a position of power to call his lawyers to freeze accounts. He pulled out his phone and tried to access the main Beaumont Global corporate accounts. Access denied. He tried again. The same result. A cold dread, colder than anything he'd felt on the terrace, began to seep into his bones. He tried his personal black card. He booked 2 first-class tickets to Geneva, a desperate attempt to project some semblance of his former status. Transaction declined. "What is it?" Kat demanded, noticing the look of pure panic on his face. "My cards. They're not working," he stammered. She wouldn't. But he knew she would. And she had. While he and Kat had been sunning themselves by the pool, Genevieve and her team had been executing a corporate coup. The hotel was just the opening salvo. A new email pinged on his phone. It was an automated notification from the corporate server. His access credentials to the Beaumont Global Network had been revoked. Attached was a PDF. He opened it with trembling hands. It was a formal notification from the board of directors, a board whose members Genevieve had handpicked and cultivated over years, informing him that he was suspended from all duties as CEO pending an internal investigation into gross misconduct and misuse of company assets. The document was signed by every single board member. He was locked out. Of the company, of the bank accounts, of his entire life. Kat, who had been watching him with hawk-like intensity, saw the color drain from his face. "Robbie, what did it say? I'm suspended." He whispered the words, tasting like ash. Kat's reaction was instantaneous. The last vestige of her sycophantic adoration vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Suspended? You mean you're fired?" She spat. "So that's it. There's no money. The penthouse, the jet, it's all gone. It's just temporary." Robert pleaded desperation, making his voice thin and reedy. "I can fight this. I have shares options." "Do you?" Kat laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Or does she? You idiot! You absolute fool! You had everything, and you let her keep the keys. I hitched my wagon to a fraud." She looked at him, at his wilting posture and panicked eyes, and saw him for what he was: not a titan of industry, but a hollow front man, a charismatic shell whose power was entirely derived from the woman he had just tried to discard. He was useless to her now. Without another word, she turned to her own luggage. She unzipped a Louis Vuitton carry-on and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She opened it and tipped the contents into her hand, a pair of sapphire earrings and a diamond tennis bracelet, gifts from Robert. She shoved them into his chest. "Here, take these back. Maybe you can pawn them for a bus ticket." And with that, she turned, flagged down another taxi, and instructed the driver to take her to the nearest 5-star hotel, one she would presumably have to pay for herself. She didn't look back. Robert was left standing alone on the pavement, a pariah surrounded by the baggage of a life that was no longer his. The humiliation was complete. He had lost his wife, his mistress, his company, and his dignity, all in the space of a few short hours. Robert eventually managed to get a flight back to New York, using a secondary credit card with a low limit that Genevieve had apparently overlooked, or more likely left active as a final petty insult. He flew economy, a humiliating experience that was only a prelude to the nightmare awaiting him. He arrived at their Manhattan penthouse, a magnificent duplex overlooking Central Park, to find the locks changed. A polite but firm doorman handed him a letter from Genevieve's legal team, informing him that the property was, and always had been, held solely in her name. He was given a list of a few nearby hotels, none of which he could afford. He finally checked into a sterile business hotel in Midtown, the kind he used to book for junior analysts. It was from this beige anonymous room that he attempted to launch his counteroffensive. He called the lawyers he considered his lawyers only to be politely informed that their retainer was with Beaumont Global, and since he was suspended, they could no longer represent him. It was the same story everywhere he turned. The entire corporate and legal infrastructure he had taken for granted was loyal not to him, but to the woman who signed the checks. His only hope was his personal shareholding in the company. He had a significant block of shares granted to him over the years. They were worth hundreds of millions. It was his leverage, his golden parachute. He contacted a new independent law firm, instructing them to prepare for a proxy battle to reclaim his position. That was when the final, most devastating blow fell. His new lawyer called him a day later, his voice grim. "Robert, I've reviewed the shareholder agreements and your original employment contract. I'm afraid the news is not good." "What do you mean?" Robert asked, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. "The shares you hold are Class B shares," the lawyer explained. "They were granted to you under a golden handcuffs clause drafted by Genevieve 20 years ago. It's an unusual but ironclad provision." "Get to the point," Robert snapped. "The clause states that while you hold the shares and benefit from the dividends, the voting rights are irrevocably assigned to the majority shareholder, Genevieve. Furthermore, in the event of a marital dissolution due to proven infidelity or any action deemed by the board to bring the company into disrepute, ownership of the shares automatically reverts to the company. The suspension and the ensuing public scandal have triggered that clause. Robert, you don't own anything. You never truly did." The phone felt heavy in Robert's hand. He had signed those documents decades ago, barely reading them, eager to get to the cocktail parties and the accolades. He had assumed they were standard formalities. He never imagined Genevieve, his quiet, unassuming wife, was capable of such long-term Machiavellian foresight. She had built a gilded cage around him from the very beginning, and he had been too arrogant and complacent to ever notice the bars. The final nail in the coffin was the prenuptial agreement. He had always been smug about it. It was a simple document stating that in the event of a divorce, all assets acquired before the marriage remained with their original owner. At the time, they had both been young and had little. He assumed that the vast fortune of Beaumont Global, acquired during the marriage, would be split 50-50. His lawyer delivered the brutal truth. The prenup is valid. But Beaumont Global wasn't an asset acquired during the marriage in the traditional sense. It was built upon seed capital and intellectual property, a proprietary algorithm that Genevieve created and registered before you were married. The courts will view the entire company as an extension of her pre-marital assets. She owns it all, Robert. Everything. He was left with nothing but a personal bank account containing less than $200,000 and a wardrobe of clothes that now seemed like a costume from a different life. A week later, the divorce papers arrived. Genevieve was not asking for anything. She was informing him of the state of play. The settlement she offered was almost insulting, a one-time payment of $1 million contingent on him signing a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive he wouldn't be able to write a book, give an interview, or even mention the name Beaumont Global ever again. It was a gag order in exchange for a pittance. His fall was as swift as it was total. The magazines that once featured him on their covers now ran lurid stories about his spectacular downfall, complete with blurry cell phone. Pictures of his public eviction from the Grand Elysian. He was a laughing stock, a cautionary tale. A few months passed. Robert was living in a small rented apartment in New Jersey, trying to find work as a consultant. But his name was toxic. no one would touch him. One evening, while channel surfing, he stopped on a business news channel. The anchor was reporting live from Lake Como. The newly rebranded Beaumont on the Lake Hotel, formerly the Grand Elysian, is having its grand reopening tonight, the reporter chirped. The hotel, recently acquired by the famously private Genevieve Beaumont, has undergone a stunning modernization. It's being hailed as the new benchmark in global luxury, and it's seen as the first move in Mrs. Beaumont's new, more public-facing role as she takes the full, undisputed helm of her global empire. The camera panned to the grand entrance. A black Rolls-Royce pulled up, and out stepped Genevieve. She was wearing a breathtaking silver gown, looking radiant, powerful, and decades younger than he had ever seen her. She smiled for the cameras, a genuine, confident smile he hadn't seen in years. She was no longer a ghost in the machine. She was the machine. As she walked up the marble steps of her hotel, a reporter shouted a question. "Mrs. Beaumont, what prompted this sudden, bold new chapter for you and your company?" Genevieve paused, turning to the camera. A knowing, almost dangerous sparkle lit her eyes. "Let's just say," she said, her voice broadcast to the world, "I was recently reminded of the importance of remaining relevant. And there you have it. The story of Genevieve Beaumont is a powerful, modern-day fable about the dangers of underestimation. It shows that true power isn't always loud and flashy. Sometimes it's the quiet, calculating force that moves the world from the shadows. Katerina and Robert made the fatal error of judging a book by its cover, assuming that a woman of a certain age who preferred substance over spectacle was a relic of the past. They forgot that the deepest waters are often the most still, and that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Genevieve's revenge wasn't just about infidelity. It was a complete and total reclamation of her identity, her power, and her legacy. What did you think of her incredible checkmate? Was it the ultimate revenge, or did she go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more tales of when the underestimated show their true strength. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss an update.